ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
The human mind is an astonishingly complex thing. It can contain whole worlds of memories and stories and imagination within it. So it's not surprising that it can break down in complex and strange ways. The great reference book of psychiatry, which is known as the DSM, lists one particular disorder that's known as depersonalization. It says depersonalization is when the individual may feel detached from his or her entire being. There may also be a sense of feeling robotic, lacking control of one's speech or movements, a sense of a split self, with one part observing and one participating. Individuals may suffer obsessional preoccupation, constantly obsessing about whether they really exist, or checking their perceptions to determine whether they appear real. Individuals with depersonalization may have difficulty describing their symptoms and may think they are crazy or going crazy. Now, I'd never heard of this strange and hellish condition until I read Nathan Dunne's book. Nathan Dunne is an Australian author and journalist and art critic. He was living in London when he became afflicted with this catastrophic sense of not being himself. And it didn't creep up on him. It hit him like a hammer blow one evening in 2008. It was so hard to have it treated, because even for an erudite guy like Nathan, it was so hard to find words to adequately describe the strangeness of depersonalization to a doctor. Dealing with the everyday terror of this poorly understood but increasingly diagnosed condition compelled Nathan to find his own way through a thicket of the most profound questions about the self and the soul. Nathan's memoir is called When Nothing Feels Real. Hello, Nathan. Welcome.
Thanks, Richard. Good to be here.
This story starts on an evening in 2008. You were living in London with your partner at the time. What was life like for you?
Parts of it were incredibly exciting. I was studying as a postgraduate in an art history degree. I was in a brand new relationship with a completely enchanting Portuguese woman called Maria. And so life seemed all ahead, really. I was in my middle to late 20s, and it really felt like I was looking forward to an academic career where I might teach. I was slowly making new friends, discovering all the things that a kind of student living abroad does, films, theatre, cheap tickets to the Royal Opera House. It really did feel like the smorgasbord of London was at my fingertips. I mean, I remember when I first arrived, back then there was a printed editions of Time Out, and there was this page that had written at the top this headline of 200 plays on a night. And I think that for myself and perhaps many other Australians, it's those kind of things which makes us want to move to London in the first place and, live in the cold for a bit to experience the wealth of those kinds of experiences. So I was having kind of a bit of all of that and trying my best to write and get my head around the structure of this thesis that I was doing.
So it's this 2008, that evening in which this thing hit you. How did that evening unfold?
It was the middle of winter, February, and, I was in this fairly new relationship, and in a fit of spontaneity and enthusiasm, we decided to go for this midnight swim. We lived in this area of North London that was fairly close to Hampstead Heath, which is, if people, know London at all, it's actually a very famous spot, particularly in the summertime when the sun shines. People are out, locals and tourists swimming.
Summertime, you say, but This is winter. You're going for a night swim in winter in those ponds in Hampstead Heath?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It felt a little reckless. That was part of the excitement of it.
It's romantic, was it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it was, are we going to do this? Let's go. It had just stopped raining. It was just approaching midnight. We jumped on our bikes, and when we got to the Heath, there was this kind of low fog over the water, and we just jumped in. It was a fairly dark night. We swam out to the middle. We were together. We were talking, playing around in the water, completely alone in the middle of this park in North London. And then something happened to me. And to this day, I've been really trying to work out, trying to decode or unpick what exactly happened.
What did it feel like in your head, this thing that hit you all of a sudden? How did it feel physically? The physical sensation of what suddenly hit you while you're in this freezing cold pond in Hampstead?
I think the best way to describe it is it was like this great hand. It was like as though something intervened from outside. It was really like a lightning bolt or like a big blow in which I had an out-of-body experience. But what happened was, and why it was so terrifying, was that part of myself after this blow remained outside myself. So in the water, I'm splashing around. I don't really have a sense of where I am. You know, my reality is not anchored in the reality that I understood before jumping in with Maria. And so I get to the bank of the pond and I really have no sense of who I am. I look down at my hands, at my body, and I don't recognize them as my own body.
But you have your memories. It's not like you don't know who you are, but you don't feel yourself to be who you are. Is that it?
Yes, I can say my name. I can hear my voice. I can hear the words coming out of my throat. Both the world itself doesn't feel real, like the environment on the heath doesn't feel real, and also my body feels like as if it is somebody else's. It felt like I was looking at myself from above. So the mind itself felt like it was physically out of place, if you can imagine that. So even though, you know, the brain is above the neck, you imagine where it's physically located, this particular experience, this severe onset of depersonalization meant that I became like dislocated from that reality.
Are you kind of more housed in that sense of that voice or that self that's standing back and looking down on yourself? Is that what it is? Something like that?
Yeah. It's an immediate sense that the person that you knew or the thing that has anchored you has somehow been vacated. Your independent will feels like it has been taken away, which is very terrifying. So you have this kind of loss of freedom. And it's very peculiar because you are aware that you are moving through the world. You are aware that there are objects, trees, rocks, water around you, but it is as though you are kind of a puppet manipulated from outside. And so it was this huge kind of like shock and awe moment in which I was just reeling from.
What had happened in the water? Had something specific happened while you were splashing around in that sort of icy
Very
cold pond?
water. I mean, it's funny, you know, thinking back because so much of that moment have been picked over and my memories are so distorted around what exactly happened. But we were in the middle of the water and I remember our bodies touching, embracing, not for any long period of time, but it was almost as though I touched my partner, Maria, we you know, pulled in close. And the sense that I have was that when I pushed back from her, it was as though in the middle or in between our bodies, then there was something that intervened and this sense of self that I had was removed.
With this sudden, weird, dramatic sense of terror that was flooding through you, was there physical pain too?
Yes, at the time, I think I didn't have a real sense of physical pain, like in the moment, but immediately afterwards, yes, there was like a burning pain, particularly at the base of my spine. My nerve endings felt as though they were like tiny candles, you know, so yeah, my nerves felt very much like on fire, which is very strange because I came to learn later that it was both a sense of profound numbness, which goes along with being removed from your body, but also this coupling with this incredible pain. So there is this profound sense of emotional numbness and also this profound reduction in pain perception. And it's like those things fusing together give you this kind of out of body kind of like feeling of like that you have like a shadow self. And so I started to run around. I had that kind of immediate gut sense that I needed to start moving as if to shake off something that had happened to me. But, I quickly realized that that was all but impossible.
What you're going through is so strange. And I'm assuming Maria, your partner, was going, what's wrong? What's wrong?
And, exactly.
And what could you say to her? Do you remember what you could even say to her about what was happening to you?
I simply said, I don't feel like myself. And I kept repeating that. Like, I don't feel like me. I'm not me. I mean, I think I said at one point, I am invisible. I feel like I'm dead. These kind of things, very dramatic language, but that was the way that I felt, that very extreme sense that my life was coming to an end.
What happened when you got back to your apartment?
When we got back to the apartment, there was an initial sense of, okay, I've returned home. This is a place where I can be orientated. There are some guardrails here in terms of my senses. But then it immediately became apparent that this thing that had happened to me was not going away. So, I mean, it was obviously very late, so very early in the morning at that point. And we were having these kind of bit part conversations, my partner and I, about how I was feeling. And she was like, look, she tried to, and I can completely respect and understand this, that, we tried to get common sense to intervene. Look, it's cold water. It's the middle of winter. Let's just draw a line under this, go to sleep, kind of sleep it off, as if it's, you might wake up with a little hangover or something, for whatever it is. But whatever this thing is, that could be cured or alleviated just by a good night's sleep, or just taking the next day off from work so I wouldn't go into work on my thesis in the library or anything like that.
So what happened the next day when you woke up?
Well, this is somewhat difficult to describe because it's one of the most difficult, lowest points in my life, which is I didn't know what was happening to me. And so I felt like I really had no choice but to bring my life to a close. I wanted to end my life in suicide. I just really had no sense that I could go on living. When you don't know yourself, then what is your purpose for being in the world? And I felt like I was, in a way, like already dead. It's really strange. The experience of this severe onset of depersonalization to end my life was just almost what the condition or this experience required of me. It was almost like an inevitable step that was to take place.
Well, thankfully you didn't succeed.
Yes.
And you were brought in to have some tests. The doctors might have assumed you'd had a stroke or something like that, or you were suffering a schizophrenic episode or something.
Exactly, yeah.
So what kind of tests could they do on you? Did you have an MRI, for example?
Yes, exactly. There were a number of brain images done, but one of the things that I remember that I really wanted to have done was an eye test, which is a very kind of basic thing. But because my perception was so distorted and things were so disoriented in the world, my initial thought was that I was going blind or that something was wrong with the way that I could see. Like, hang on, there must be something in terms of the magnification of my eyes, something ocular that was off. So I remember really being insistent about, like, I need an eye test. And if we can't get the right eye specialist, I need to go to an eye hospital. I mean, obviously my vitals were checked and that kind of thing, and the MRI was done. But the way that I remember it was doctors kind of going in and out of rooms, having discussions, like muffled conversations, but just really the way that I could see and the way that I could think was incredibly distorted and intangible. I just really did not want to be a part of that experience of the world anymore at all. And there was no immediate kind of recognition or healing or anything they could point to that might say that this was going to end.
So were you just sent home after that, after you were given the all clear on your eye test and your MRI?
Yes. I mean, I think that when you present to an emergency department, if it's clear that you are not undergoing a psychotic break or, if you haven't lost any limbs, if there's no need for like emergency doctors to treat you, then they suggest you return home.
So what, did you have to fall back on yourself to try and figure out what was happening?
Yes. I mean, oh my gosh, I really did not know how to call friends or family or try and articulate what I had experienced. And when I tried to, I fell back on the language that sounds prosaic and everyday, like, oh, I didn't feel like myself or feel like outside myself. I mean, that's an expression that you often hear. But what I did was, when I didn't feel like I was understood by Maria or friends that I would call, I produced like a Word document on my computer and I titled it The Possibles. And I just began to pile in a whole bunch of different things that I was researching online. And it was just this plethora of different possible conditions with different symptoms, and I would cross-check them, these kinds of symptoms, and men of my age. I tried to basically, in a very amateurish way, get access to data to get some sense of what this thing might be.
Were you suffering psychosis and hallucinations, aside from this profound feeling of dislocation?
No. That's the thing which distinguishes this condition from what we might call, in a very casual way, like going mad or losing your mind.
So you're still quite rational?
Yeah, well, one of probably the most terrifying thing about it is that your reality is still intact. You still are rational. And that is one of the key terrifying parts, because you can rationally think and observe and see that you are kind of not inside your body. It's like the self is in confinement, like you're kind of trapped outside. And so because there are these different fluctuating symptoms, they map onto a number of other conditions. There are, many conditions which might have numbness, they might have pain, they might have a sense of you not knowing who you are for a while. There are, stroke patients which have a kind of like ghost limbs and, these kinds of things. So I thought it could be any number of these things, but I really had no idea. And it probably won't surprise anyone, the more that you go down the rabbit hole of trying to find what is wrong with you, then you think that you have everything, that it's further confusion, frustration, and frankly, despair.
In pre-modern times, in medieval times, someone going through what you were going through might have concluded that they'd had some curse laid upon them by an enemy or an angry god. Was your mind going into those areas, going into looking for supernatural explanations for what you were going through?
Yes, and I think that I feel that is particular to my case, because I did grow up in a very religious family. So I am what many in our community call mish kids, or the son of missionaries. And so my childhood, my early to middle childhood, was in India, and that's because my father had a revelation on a Queensland beach that he needed to go to India with the family and evangelize the local population. And many of my extended family are also missionaries, including currently in Ukraine. So I grew up with this sense of the supernatural being very present. And it was as though God is always present, and so therefore everything in God's orbit is also present. So I guess you might say, I had this real sense of an interventionist God, that something could come in from outside.
A powerful sense of the numinous too. Your work as an art historian and art critic means you're very, very open to the majesty and beauty of Christian art and Christian imagery. I wonder if this made you particularly open to a condition like this.
Honestly, I've often wondered that, if that was part of the catalyst, my sense of it. But as I have gotten older and been through various treatments and therapies, I now know that it is very much evidence and fact-based, in the sense that this was probably a result of a genetic predisposition and the acute stress of my life at the time. Even though I described initially in our conversation that I was living this great life, there was also, stresses of graduate study and things like that, as well as trying to work out, what this new relationship was about. So it was kind of, romantic kind of entanglements and confusions as well.
But what you had was essentially a neurological condition that presented itself as a spiritual crisis.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. I really do think that is. And perhaps I had more of a sense of wanting to underline the spiritual because of my background and my family, my childhood.
So you finally went to see a doctor. Was it a psychiatrist or a GP that you went to see?
First of all, I was living near central London, so the local NHS clinic was in Bloomsbury, and so I just fronted up to the GP and I said, look, I tried to, I had the problem of language. I had the problem of trying to articulate this horrific thing that happened to me. So I literally was saying to a GP, look, I feel as though I'm invisible. I feel as though, like, I'm here talking to you, but part of me or all of me is actually dead right now.
And because you're rational, you're probably aware that you sound crazy.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. I was aware, and there was such a limit to the words. I had no linguistic framework, no sense of how I could bridge the gap between my experience and communicating to this doctor who I really, really needed to help me.
And once you'd managed to sputter out this explanation, feeling its inadequacy as you're saying it, what did the doctor say?
There was some long pauses, and he said, it sounds like you're experiencing depression, anxiety-related depression. And so I was prescribed some blue pills. He said, don't worry, take this. And he said, in a few weeks, you'll probably feel a lot better. Just take it easy. Don't go to the library. Chill out on your relationship a bit, and this will really help you. So it was an immediate medical or, medicated response. And I don't necessarily think that, I spent a long time blaming the medical establishment in my head. But looking back, I can really understand how the language that I used, the words that I had at my disposal would make the doctor believe that, okay, well, this fits under the umbrella of depression. Let's, the first port of call, he showed up here at the coalface in the clinic. Let's give him these pills and see if that doesn't do the trick.
So depression's like a really big umbrella, isn't it? There's a lot of things that fit under that umbrella. He probably had 5 people walk through the door already that day with different forms of depression and went, this is just another slightly odder form of it.
Exactly, yeah. There was no kind of nuance or there was no particular singular distinction that he had in terms of interpreting what I was saying. And so, yeah, look, it looks like you're depressed. You're using some strange ways to describe it, but let's actually try this first form of treatment that, let's print you out a script.
You're describing it strange. That's what depressed people do. So once he gave you some drugs to treat it, how did that affect you?
Oh, look, honestly, things just got worse. And I just had a real sense that this was not what my actual diagnosis was. And I've tried, over time to pinpoint why I had that sense, but it was like a gut feeling that, this isn't depression. Because, I also didn't feel depressed. When you front up to the clinic and these, forms that you fill out. And the problem is that I did have this intense suicidal ideation. I had actually made an attempt, and you have to note those things down on the form. But it was not long after that, maybe 4 or 5 days, a kind of working week, that I really understood, or I quickly understood that, this is not the diagnosis that is correct.
What happened to your relationship with your partner, Maria, at this stage?
Yeah, it was really just falling apart. And she made it pretty clear to me that she couldn't cope with the way that I was. And part of me really, in time has come to understand and respect that too, because I didn't know what was happening to me. To her, I had all the signs of a person in the midst of a psychotic break. I was saying these incredibly odd things, very peculiar behavior patterns. I wouldn't want to take a shower or bath because water was a kind of trigger point for me because of that initial onset of the swim. And, we were young people, and it was a fairly new relationship, and it was very difficult for her to cope. I didn't have the language to articulate to her what was really wrong with me, and she didn't have the language to comfort me. And so the relationship very quickly broke down, and she left, and so I was even more alone.
I suppose when you sign up for a relationship, you fall in love with that person, and there you are saying, I'm not that person anymore. That's part of the problem, and also your ongoing distress. But you must have felt betrayed, though, that in this moment of terrible distress that she couldn't be with you and care for you.
Yes. I think that when you are at the lowest points in your life, you really need the people who are closest to you to be there and to offer you the help to kind of lift you out, or at least to be if they can't offer that, if they don't have the capacity, then at least to be a guide towards somebody or some place or something that will help.
When you have this feeling of no longer being yourself, where is that voice, that other self? Is it in another spot inside you? Is it somewhere out of your head? Does this even make sense, me even asking this question? Can you explain how the separation works?
Yes, there's a gap between the way that you hear your voice. I wouldn't describe it as an echo, but it is as though you are able to hear your voice from outside. It really is if you are kind of another person standing next to yourself. But to be very particular about it, it's as though you are hearing and seeing, for that matter, but you are hearing your voice from the back from where you are speaking. So it's like the back of the head. If I was taller than myself, standing above, then I would kind of hear it as if it was, I was receiving it with a little bit of a delay, maybe.
So it's like playing from a speaker behind your head somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, yeah, for sure.
You became fixated for a while on the concept of birth. Why was that? Why do you think you became fixated on the idea and images of birth?
Oh, boy, it's something that I've really wrestled with. When I'm trying to understand this odd sense, like I'm alive but I feel dead, then I began to wonder about the beginnings of my life. You know, what my life was like in the womb, like how my sense of self first revealed itself as whole, for example. Because what I had lost was this sense of my whole self. And I felt like I was cleaved and split open into these two parts. And so, I mean, we often think of babies as innocent to the troubles of the world. And I was like, well, look, I was probably whole when I was inside my mother's womb, probably towards the end of her pregnancy. And so I became fixated on my time in the womb because I was contained in this place where I was whole. I was trying to see myself in an image of my whole body as a baby. And then when you're born into the world, you know, you come out and there is a sense that your parents or whoever is witnessing, the nurses, that you are this whole body, this whole self. So it was really looking back to an earlier time in my life where things were in the right place.
But this is the thing, you know, I think most of us think of our sense of self as this profoundly anchored thing, you know, anchored in our own bodies. But the current thinking at the moment is, and we can't know this for sure because you can't interview newborn babies, but the current thinking is that the sense of self doesn't develop until we get the ability to speak. Until then, apparently, as infants, we don't really see ourselves as being distinct from our mothers. And it's only when we get language. You know, I got kids and it's fascinating watching them change as they get language.
Yes.
And that sense of self starts to cohere. So we're not born with a coherent sense of self. Did you know that at the time, I wonder?
No, I didn't. And as I've grown older and in the research that I've done in the previous years, I understand now from the literature on psychology, it is, you know, what is commonly termed the mirror phase, when we begin to recognize ourselves in mirrors and photos. Our sense of self begins to cohere. And one of the things that I became fixated on was this, exactly what you were just saying, I mean, in terms of the gap between birth and once this kind of mirror phase is over and you have a stronger sense of yourself as a toddler. And I mean, it's all remains somewhat confusing to me, but
it's confusing to all of us because I mean, as you're saying this to me, Nathan, I'm realizing, I suppose, that this one's own sense of self is really quite slippery, and maybe we just don't tend to look at it because you feel that kind of abyss that sort of opens up, and that's what you were in. You were in that hole.
Honestly, I think that you really have a sense of yourself when you feel like you don't have it anymore. So with me, you have a strong sense of the importance of self when a part of it is cleaved off or confined in some way, and you have to try to make it recohere or to rejoin. Then the self and the idea of it become extremely important, because you're like, where is the direction? Where are the traffic lights to lead me back to this anchored sense, as you put it?
So this leads us to another really profound question, which is the question of love. I think when we're loved, we feel like we're seen. Did you think at the time that if I'm loved, then that might make me more coherent? Because that person will see me and they'll have a sense of who I am, and maybe I can get it from that person who loves me.
Yes. It emerged quite quickly after my onset, especially because of the demise of my relationship. Yeah, a great yearning for love. It's probably what I needed more than anything, even a correct diagnosis. I was in the very peculiar state of feeling as if I was invisible or largely invisible. So I really needed, in a very physical way, to be seen and spoken to in a way that I felt loved. And so that manifests itself in a yearning for romantic love, to reclaim my love for Maria, because when we had initially been together, obviously my sense of self was not disrupted. I had not had the onset yet. So I had a real sense of trying to restore that relationship, to reach out to her, to tell her that somehow I was going to find out what was wrong with me. I could be better. I could be cured. And then our relationship could be also made whole again.
But you hadn't been diagnosed.
Yes.
So you couldn't, I suppose, even believe that you would get better at this point.
Yes. I had no real evidence that I would get better, but I wanted to convince her and some others around me that I would, because if I said it enough and I believed it enough, then perhaps I would arrive at the right clinic, the right doctor, the right specialist who could give me the correct diagnosis and the right treatment. And then everything in my life which had come apart and collapsed would come back together again.
Then in London, you attended an art lecture. You saw a woman in the audience named Angela, a 60-something, very stylish woman living in London.
Yes.
How did she strike you when you saw her in the audience?
It was as though we had a completely instant connection. It is though without even speaking, we were drawn to one another. She was a woman who was decades older than me. She was very well dressed, and she seemed to be about as disinterested in the lecture that we were attending as I was. And so we immediately clocked one another. And the way that I would describe it is that it was like love at first sight, but it wasn't necessarily romantic love. It was just a kind of instant and profound connection that I've come to know as extremely rare in this life. And we went to the student bar afterwards. I went back to her house. We immediately just started to talk about her lives. She was basically an oil heiress. So she was from what she described as the prairies of Western Canada, and she had been in a loveless and abusive marriage for many years. And it was when she was at the grocery store one day buying her things that she got a call that her husband had suddenly died and she had inherited his wealth. And that was in Canada, and she took that opportunity to then explore her interests, to move to London. And she really sensed that there was something that was really ailing me. She became this maternal figure and comforted me. And I was an Australian living in London. She was Canadian. So we both had a kind of more of a straight talking way than the kind of the English, let's say.
And I hasten to add, this isn't a sexual relationship that's about to begin.
No,
not at all.
No.
It's something almost beyond that. What did she offer you?
It was an incredibly intimate experience. She said to me very plainly, as though she was seeing right through me or right inside me, she said, "What's your greatest fear?" She just asked me point blank. And I said to her, honestly, I have this great fear of having a bath because of this water. And all I needed to say was, having a bath. And she immediately just took me by the hand and took me down a little hallway into this very beautiful bathroom. She ran me a bath. And without even telling me what to do, I just knew to take my clothes off and get in the bath. And she just kind of put her hand on my head. It was this very maternal figure. And she just told me that everything was going to be all right. And I cried in pain and I was extremely vulnerable. And she just really didn't have to say anything. And afterwards, I was so tired, so exhausted from, it was almost as this kind of profound connection that we just kind of lay on the lounge afterwards, after the bath, and we just kind of held each other. And we didn't really need to talk about what had happened. It was like an instant connection that was not sexual or romantic, but it was some part of her background understood with great clarity exactly the frustration, confusion, and ailment that I was suffering from.
She saw your brokenness and wasn't frightened by it.
Exactly. Yes. I miss her a lot. Yeah, I miss her.
You called your mum in Australia and you're trying to tell her what you're going through. What happened when you told your mum about all this?
Well, like many sensible mothers, she said, you got to come home. You got to come back to Australia. And I was at that point where I really didn't feel like I had any other option. So I came back, I moved into my parents' garage, and my mother did her extreme best to take care of me and to understand. She said, look, go to a GP here, a local one that we know, try and get a referral, try and see a specialist, and let's really try to figure out what's actually wrong with you.
She gave you something amazing. She gave you your grandfather's war memoir. Now, this is your grandfather who'd served in the Pacific in the Second World War. Yes. What was it like to open this and read it?
My grandfather was a gunner on the front lines in Borneo, and reading my grandfather's words and the extraordinary things that he went through in battle, and he was incredibly isolated and spiritually alone and lost and in despair and really felt like his life was coming to an end. There was a real mapping onto parts of my own experience that really resonated and helped me. He said, and this is partly because my family comes from a Baptist denomination, but he said, water does not harm, it cleans the soul. So I had this sense, this very baptismal sense that actually water was nothing to be feared, but actually it could do something for me that I was in most need of, which was to be made whole again, to be made tangible, to have some granite sense of reality, to be anchored, that water was not to be feared, but to be welcomed.
The rite of baptism is thought to wash away the sins and to bring a kind of a new coherence. So it's the exact opposite of what you'd gone through.
Yeah. It was almost as though it could somehow, wash away my illness or, make it go away rather than what had been my actual experience, which was that is what had been the catalyst for this onset of depersonalization.
Then something happened which should have happened a long time ago, which was your mother, who stood back, took a good hard look at what you were going through, didn't leave it up to you to try and figure out what was going on, found you a specialist, a really first-rate specialist at last in Australia to go and see. Tell me what happened when you walked into the room of this specialist.
The gap that I had with language, like I just didn't have the words, that didn't matter because he had read my patient history, he'd read my medical details and everything, and he had a very strong sense, even before meeting me, that in fact what I was suffering from was this condition called depersonalization. So in the clinic, I heard the words for the first time. And as soon as I heard the words depersonalization, like it made so much sense to me just to hear that. So that was a revelation.
So he didn't ask you 100 questions. He'd done his research on you already, and what you'd already said, he went, boom, you've got depersonalization.
Yeah. And you know what the irony is, Richard? That one of the only major innovative clinics in the West for treating depersonalization is in the Maudsley Hospital. That's a clinic in South London. And there was a doctor there called Dr. Anthony David, or known as Tony David, who pioneered the study and treatment of depersonalization in the 1990s. And I was studying in London at the time, and yet, because of the way the NHS system is structured, I couldn't access this specialized clinic. So it was only in returning to Australia and seeing this specialist, this doctor here, that I was able to get the help that I desperately needed. And so the treatment options that he presented to me were some that he would also prescribe and suggest to people suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder.
Like exposure therapy?
Exactly.
And what was your exposure therapy?
It was taking a small towel, dousing it with water, and wrapping that towel around my left or right wrist and the palms of my hands in a way that would get me used to the texture of water. I mean, say if you're claustrophobic, for example, and you have a fear of lifts, when you are given like exposure therapy, the first day, the doctor might say, look, just walk past the lift. That's it. That's all you need to do. A week passes, just walk by it again. And then on it goes. 3 weeks in, you walk inside the lift and then you get out. And then eventually you lead up to feeling like you're not going to panic or fall ill when you actually take this lift ride.
If you're arachnophobic, here's a picture of a spider. There's one on the other side of the room, and by the end of however many months, you're patting the spider. That's the idea, isn't it?
Exactly.
So were you able to pat the spider at the end of this process and feel more comfortable to be around and within water?
Yes, it was an incredibly long process. First, it was performing very basic domestic acts like taking a shower, having a bath, washing your hands, getting used to, like, going to the beach, for example. Like, those kind of things, I had to build up to those because my depersonalized symptoms would be instantly triggered by water. Sometimes even when I was driving by water or being driven by a body of water, I would be triggered by that. But years later, I was able to actually return to the site of my onset and be completely immersed in water. But I mean, that didn't happen in the beginning.
Now, you're really at pains to say in your book that this doesn't cure you. And in fact, what this does is over time, it just sort of turns down the volume of it and then more and more so you start to feel more yourself. Is that a good way of putting it over time?
Yes. The sense of what is called or what is known as like the second body symptoms, this feeling like you're outside yourself, through treatment, that is reduced. So you slowly begin to feel more like yourself, as if your body is more whole, the reality around you is more tangible, the objects appear and feel more real.
How grateful were you for that feeling to return to you?
To go from where I had been to where I thought my life was over to this period where I really felt as though I was becoming myself again, it was everything. It gave me life back. And not only life, but hope. Like I felt like I could see the future again and that life was worth living in all its different aspects. I might fall in love again. I might be able to experience joy in those things.
That amazing woman, Angela, who bathed you, she's no longer with us. Did she live long enough to hear that you'd made these concrete steps towards recovery?
She was aware that I was in the initial phases. She knew that I had met with the doctor in Sydney. She passed away really at the beginning of me getting better.
But she'd given you this incredible gift, which was to see you in the wretchedness of your brokenness and love you. I mean, that's an amazing thing to do.
Yes. And as I get older, I realize just how rare that is. I think perhaps what we all want, if I can say that, is to be profoundly understood, in our way, in all of our idiosyncrasies, faults, failures, to somehow be seen. And often that is the role of a parent or a loved one, a spouse or a partner. And when I was away from my family, she really offered that in that moment. So it was one of those kind of chance meetings which really changed the course of my life.
I think with a narrative like this, Nathan, everyone wants to hear, I finally got diagnosed properly and I was treated and now I'm fine. You're not fine. You just get better at managing as you get older. Is that the case with you?
Yes. I can only speak in my case, but often relapse is one of the final stages of recovery, or really feeling like that you are getting better. And so over the past 20 plus years, as I've been in therapy, continued to take medication, and grown this support structure around me to help me sustain, a stable life, you learn to live with it. You learn where the important guardrails up. But sometimes if there's something else vulnerable happening in your life, or something that sensitizes you in a way that makes you vulnerable, for example, then those old triggers become more powerful. And the symptoms come on very quickly and very strongly. And luckily, I've now got a good toolbox in being able to manage them. But let me put it like this. When you feel it coming on, it's as though you feel like as if you're moving up towards the edge of the cliff. And you are able to catch yourself and say, hey, here are the tools. And then you slowly are able to walk yourself back down.
Was there a moment when you could suddenly turn and say to someone, oh, I'm feeling much better now. I'm feeling myself again?
Yes. It was at breakfast, over breakfast cereal in my mother's kitchen. And I'd gone through this gradual process of feeling whole again, feeling better. And I just said to my mother very, very simply, I feel like myself again. And milk was spilt, hugs were undertaken, and there was this sense that a line had been crossed and that things would be better.
You now understand so much more about your condition, what you've been going through. You've looked at all the past histories, and all these people throughout history have said, I'm going through this strange and incredible thing. What remains mysterious about this condition for you?
I think what continues to elude me is things that are outside my specialist field of knowledge. So, say, for example, during my research, I found that there are 3 particular brain processes that contribute to this sense of being outside of your body. There's the amygdala, the insula, and the prefrontal cortex. And the amygdala and insula are underactive, and the prefrontal cortex is overactive. And the way that I think about it is that there's these 3 rivers that are coming together, and the currents are running at different speeds. And when they come together, there's this great mess of rapids, and things don't flow properly. That's the way that I have come to understand it. But parts of the brain are suppressed or are dysfunctional. And the mystery of that, even after talking to specialists who understand the origin of neurological pain or numbness and things like that, they tell me we're still on the frontiers of understanding how all these brain processes work, especially how they don't work and how they produce strange conditions like depersonalization. But more personally, I go back to that moment of my onset thinking, in a very selfish way, like, why me? Why was I tortured in this way? And why did I have to go through this? And why couldn't I go through something that had a lot more clarity in terms of the medical establishment? Why does the system not work properly? I have no end of complaints and anger and frustration. But at the end, I have felt that the best course for me is I have to make myself more aware, and also just to let go. I have to, accept. Even though I really hate that word. But
yeah, you do. Tell me about this, because you say acceptance is the word that's often used, but what's really meant by that term, acceptance?
I think it makes sense for a lot of people. At least that's what I'm told. There's therapeutic models that have acceptance, radical acceptance, complete acceptance.
But you think that's a euphemism, a polite word?
Yeah, I personally, I just cannot relate to it at all. I think that acceptance is never really acceptance. You don't accept it. It's more surrender. If you are able to surrender in the fit of the storm, while this fire is burning you up, if you're able to be one with it in a way, surrender to it, that's the kind of language that I understand. I could never accept it. I don't want to accept it. Don't tell me to accept this. I don't want to accept it. I can't relate to that at all.
You need to surrender to it.
Yes, and particular words help. the simple word afloat, like FLOAT, even when I spell it to myself, I find that very helpful because through exposure therapy, it helps me embrace the idea that I have to join in, to surrender to this thing that's happening to me, this horrible symptom. I have to almost like float up to meet it, not avoid it, not treat it as an obstacle, but to surrender to it. That makes a lot more sense to me.
Nathan, one of the things you're most earnest about is that you don't want people to go through the hell of not knowing what they're going through. And to that end, you've got a whole list of contacts, support networks, places where people can seek advice on this condition in the back of your book. And if it's okay, we'll put that on our website as well.
Yes, absolutely.
In the meantime, it's been extraordinary having this conversation with you. I don't think I've ever had a conversation quite like this before. It's been completely fascinating speaking with you, Nathan. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. It means a lot.
Nathan Dunne's book is called When Nothing Feels Real. Today's conversation with Nathan Dunne was created on the lands of the Gadigal people. Producer is Alice Moldovan. Executive producer is Nicola Harrison. I'm Richard Feidler. Thanks for listening.
Podcast and broadcast. This is Conversations with Richard Feidler.
Conversations Live. The national tour is coming to a capital city near you, and tickets are selling fast. We've added extra shows in Adelaide, Hobart and Perth. Don't miss your chance to be part of Conversations Live. Head to the Conversations page for all the details.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Richard Feidler. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.